The evening sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink as Officer James Carter drove through the quiet neighborhood. His shift had been long, mostly filled with routine checks and minor traffic stops. He had just finished his coffee and was thinking about heading back to the station when something caught his eye. A car up ahead swerved slightly out of its lane before correcting itself. It wasn't a major violation, but enough for James to pull the vehicle over. He turned on his flashing lights and followed the car until it pulled into a small roadside park. The area was peaceful, with only a few streetlights flickering on and the sound of distant birds chirping. James stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his belt and cap as he walked toward the driver's side window. The man behind the wheel looked tense, gripping the steering wheel tightly and avoiding direct eye contact. James tapped lightly on the glass and gave a polite nod. "Good evening, sir," he said in a calm voice. "I noticed your car drifting a bit. Everything okay?" The man cleared his throat and nodded quickly. "Yes, officer, I'm fine, just tired from work." James asked for his license and registration while scanning the inside of the car. The front seat looked normal, papers scattered, a water bottle on the console. But something in the back caught his attention. A small child sat quietly in the back seat staring straight ahead. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't move or speak, just sat there like she was frozen in place. James felt a strange chill run down his spine. He kept his expression neutral, but his mind started racing. Something wasn't right. The little girl wore a simple dress that looked too big for her, and there were faint marks visible on her arms. He tried not to make it obvious that he was looking at her, but every second he spent watching her made him more uneasy. "I'll need to see your documents," James said again, keeping his tone professional. The man fumbled through the glove compartment before handing over the papers. James took them and stepped back slightly, pretending to check them while continuing to observe the girl in the back seat. She hadn't moved once, not even when her supposed father spoke. James had seen many children during traffic stops, some crying, some playing with toys, others asking questions nonstop. But this girl was silent, too silent, and her eyes, they held a kind of sadness that no child should ever have. He returned to the window and handed the papers back to the man. "Looks good. You're just tired, huh?" he asked casually. The man gave a nervous laugh and nodded. "Yes, officer, long day. We're heading home now." James tilted his head slightly, trying to get a better look at the girl. "And who's this little one?" he asked, forcing a smile. "Oh, my daughter," the man replied quickly. "Emily. She's shy." Emily didn't react. No nod, no wave, nothing. James smiled gently at her, hoping to get some kind of response. Still nothing. His gut told him something was seriously wrong. "Well, Emily," he said softly, "you've got a great dad here." He watched the man's face closely as he said it, noticing a slight twitch in his jaw. James knew he needed to act carefully. If this man wasn't really Emily's father, then pulling him over might be the only chance to help her. But if he made a mistake, he could scare the man off, or worse, he could put the girl in danger. He decided to ask the man to step out of the car for a moment. "Sir, do you mind stepping out for a quick check? I think there might be an issue with your registration." The man hesitated, clearly not wanting to leave the girl alone. "Now?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Yes, just a minute," James replied firmly. He opened the door before the man could argue further. As soon as the man stepped out, James moved quickly to the back door and opened it. Emily flinched at the sudden movement but didn't say anything. James knelt down so he was at her level and gave her a gentle smile. "Hey there, sweetheart, I'm Officer James. Can we talk for a second?" She stared at him without speaking, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the seat. James kept his voice low and soothing. "Are you okay, Emily?" Her lips trembled slightly before she shook her head slowly. James felt his heart tighten. "Do you want to go home?" he asked gently. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered, "Yes." That one word sent a wave of anger and determination through James. He had seen a lot in his years on the force, but Nothing prepared him for the sight of a scared little girl trapped in a situation she didn't understand. He reached out slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder, careful not to startle her. "You're safe now, okay? I'm going to help you." Behind him, the man was growing restless. "Is everything okay?" he called out, trying to peer into the back seat. James stood up and gave the man a firm look. "We're just checking things out. Be with you in a minute." He pulled out his radio and quietly called for backup. He needed another officer to take over with the man while he stayed with Emily. Within minutes, another patrol car arrived, and a female officer stepped out. James quickly explained the situation, pointing out the bruises and Emily's behavior. The female officer nodded and approached the car with a warm smile. "Hi there, sweetie," she said gently. "My name is Officer Lisa. Would you like to come with me for a moment?" Emily hesitated, glancing nervously at the man standing nearby. But when she saw James still beside her, she slowly nodded and allowed the officer to help her out of the car. As soon as Emily was safely away from the man, James turned to him with a serious expression. "Sir, I need you to stay right here." "What's going on?" the man asked, suddenly defensive. "You can't just—" "I believe you may be involved in a missing persons case," James interrupted, stepping closer. "And I suggest you don't say another word until we sort this out." The man's face paled, realizing he was caught. He tried to protest, but James already had his cuffs out. Within moments, the man was under arrest. Later, after more investigation, it was confirmed that Emily had been reported missing nearly 3 months ago. Her real parents had been searching desperately, believing she had been taken by someone, posing as a family friend. Now, thanks to James's sharp instincts and careful handling of the situation, she was finally going home. As the night went on, James sat in his patrol car, staring at the road ahead. His hands were steady, but his heart was still pounding. He had always known his job was about protecting people, but tonight reminded him just how important it was to pay attention, to listen, to watch, and to trust his gut. Because sometimes, the smallest signs could lead to the biggest rescue. The night air was cool and still as Officer James Carter stood near the parked cars, his eyes fixed on Emily. She sat quietly in the back of the second patrol car, wrapped in a blanket provided by Officer Lisa. Her small hands rested in her lap, and though she looked safer now, the fear in her eyes hadn't gone away completely. James could see it lingering like a shadow behind her innocent face. He knew that even though she was out of immediate danger, the real challenge had just begun. Officer Lisa stayed close to Emily, speaking softly and offering gentle reassurance. The little girl didn't say much, but she nodded occasionally, her wide eyes darting between the two officers. James watched them carefully, trying to read every reaction. He wanted to make sure Emily wasn't just physically safe, but emotionally okay too. He had seen how trauma affected children. It could stay with them for years if not handled with care. Behind him, the man who had been arrested remained silent, sitting stiffly in the back of James's patrol car. His earlier nervousness had turned into something colder, anger or maybe regret. James didn't feel any sympathy for him, not after what he had seen in Emily's eyes. He walked over to the car and looked at the man through the window. "You're going to have a lot of explaining to do," he said calmly. The man avoided his gaze, staring straight ahead like he was trying to disappear. James stepped back and took a deep breath. He had done his job well tonight. He had followed his instincts, acted quickly, and made sure Emily was safe. But now came the hard part, finding out the truth about what had happened to her. He radioed in again, requesting more support from the station. They needed to get Emily somewhere secure where she could be examined and questioned gently by professionals. Within 20 minutes, another officer arrived along with a social worker. They had dealt with similar cases before and knew exactly how to approach things. The social worker, a kind-looking woman named Maria, approached Emily slowly and knelt beside the open car door. "Hi there, sweetheart," she said in a soft voice. "My name is Maria. Would you mind coming with me so we can talk for a bit?" Emily hesitated, looking up at Officer Lisa first. The officer gave her a warm smile and nodded. "It's okay, honey. Maria's here to help. With a small nod, Emily climbed out of the car and followed Maria toward a waiting vehicle. James watched them go, feeling a strange mix of relief and worry. He knew Emily was in good hands now, but he also knew the next few hours would be difficult. For her. She would have to relive whatever nightmare she had been through. He turned his attention back to the arrest. The other officers were processing the man, checking his background and searching the car he had been driving. James helped where he could, handing over the documents he had taken during the stop. As they worked, he couldn't stop thinking about Emily's bruises and the way she had flinched when he opened the car door. What had this man done to her? How long had she been with him? And most importantly, who was she really? Back at the station, the mood was tense but focused. Emily was taken into a quiet room where Maria stayed with her while detectives prepared to speak with her. It was important not to push too hard, but they needed enough information to build a case against the man. James waited outside, pacing, slowly and trying to keep his thoughts under control. Inside the interrogation room, the man sat silently across from two detectives. He hadn't asked for a lawyer yet, which James found suspicious. He watched through the glass as one of the detectives slid a photo across the table, a recent picture of Emily with her real parents. The man's eyes flickered slightly, but he didn't react otherwise. Outside, James leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He could still see Emily's face when she whispered, "Yes." That single word had changed everything. It had confirmed his worst fears and given him the strength to act without hesitation. A few minutes later, Maria stepped out of the interview room and joined him. She looked tired but determined. "She's scared," Maria said quietly. "But she's starting to open up. She told me her real name isn't Emily. That was the name he gave her." James felt a knot tighten in his stomach. So he was lying about everything. Maria nodded. She remembers her real parents. She said she was playing in the park one day and a man came up to her pretending to know her mom. He told her he was a friend and offered her candy. She went with him willingly. James clenched his jaw. Classic abduction tactic. "Yes," Maria agreed. "And once he had her, he kept her isolated. No phone calls, no contact with anyone else. He told her nobody was looking for her and that if she tried to run, bad things would happen." James felt anger rise inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to think clearly. "Has she said anything about where they've been staying?" "A few details," Maria replied. "We might be able to find the place." That was all James needed to hear. He quickly informed the detectives, who immediately started working on getting a search warrant. Every second counted. If they could recover any evidence from the location, it would strengthen the case against the man and help prove that Emily had been held against her will. Meanwhile, Emily's parents were being contacted. The missing persons report had been filed 3 months ago, and they had never stopped searching for their daughter. When the call came in, they rushed to the station without hesitation. When they arrived, the emotional reunion brought tears to everyone's eyes. Emily ran into her mother's arms the moment she saw her, holding on tightly like she was afraid to let go. Her father knelt beside them, wrapping both of them in a hug. Watching the family reunite, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why he became a cop, not for recognition, but for moments like this. Later, after the family had some time together, James spoke with them briefly. They thanked him repeatedly, their voices filled with emotion. "We thought we'd lost her. Forever," her mother whispered, clutching Emily close. "Thank you for bringing her back." James shook his head humbly. "I'm just glad I was able to help." As the night stretched on, the investigation continued. Officers searched the suspect's home and found several items belonging to Emily, including school papers and toys from her real life. There were also signs that she had been kept in a small room with minimal access to the outside world. It was clear she had been living in fear for months. By the time James left the station, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first signs of dawn. He was exhausted, but his heart felt heavy with purpose. He had seen many things in his career, but nothing compared to the look in Emily's eyes when she finally felt safe. Driving home, he replayed the events of the night in his mind. He thought about how easily he could have missed the signs, if he hadn't noticed her expression, if he hadn't taken the time to check, if he had simply written off her silence as shyness. So many possibilities. But he had trusted his instincts, and because of that, a child was back with her family. As he pulled into his driveway, the sun was rising, casting golden light across the neighborhood. He sat in his car for a moment, letting the weight of the night settle over him. He knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, new calls, and new people needing help. But tonight, he had saved someone, and sometimes, that was all that mattered. The morning sun rose slowly over the quiet town, casting a soft golden glow on the rooftops and streets. Birds chirped in the trees, and life was beginning to stir again after a long night. But for Officer James Carter, the events of the previous hours still echoed loudly in his mind. He had barely slept, tossing and turning as images of Emily's frightened face replayed over and over. Though she was safe now, the memory of her silence, her bruises, and the way she clung to her mother haunted him. At the station, things were already moving fast. The news about the missing girl had spread quickly, and reporters were already gathered outside hoping for a statement. Inside, detectives worked hard to build a strong case against the man who had taken Emily. Evidence from his home was being processed, and interviews with specialists were being arranged to understand exactly what Emily had been through. James sat at his desk, sipping cold coffee that had long lost its warmth. His eyes were tired, but his mind was wide awake. Across from him, his partner, Officer Mike Reynolds, leaned back in his chair, flipping through a notebook filled with notes from the investigation. "This guy's a ghost," Mike said, shaking his head. "No real name, fake ID, no known family. We don't even know where he got Emily from." James frowned. "He must have planned this, took her, changed her name, kept her hidden. That kind of thing doesn't happen overnight." Mike nodded. "Yeah, but why? What was he getting out of it?" That question lingered between them like a heavy fog. There was something deeply disturbing about how carefully everything had been set up. It wasn't just a random kidnapping, it was calculated, and that made it even more terrifying. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Emily was undergoing a full medical checkup. Doctors gently examined her small body, noting old bruises and signs of malnutrition. She had clearly not been fed properly or allowed much freedom. A child psychologist spoke with her softly, trying to earn her trust. Emily was starting to open up, but slowly. Her voice was quiet, and every word seemed to cost her energy. Back at the station, James was called into a meeting with the lead detective on the case, a serious woman named Detective Karen Briggs. She was known for her sharp mind and even sharper instincts. As they reviewed the latest reports, she looked directly at James. "You did good work last night," she said simply. "You saved that girl's life." James didn't respond right away. He wasn't looking for praise, he just wanted justice for Emily. "We need to make sure we get everything on this guy," he said. "We can't let him walk." Detective Briggs nodded. "We're building the case, but we'll need Emily's testimony. That's going to take time." James understood. Children who had been through trauma often struggled to speak about it. Even when they wanted to help, fear and confusion could lock their memories away like a closed door. Later that afternoon, James visited the hospital to check on Emily. When he walked into the room, she was sitting on the bed with Maria, the social worker, coloring quietly with crayons. When she saw James, her eyes lit up slightly and she gave a small smile. "Hi, Officer James," she whispered. He smiled back and sat down beside her. "Hi there, sweetheart. How are you feeling today?" Emily shrugged. "Okay." James studied her face carefully. She looked cleaner now, her hair brushed, and a new change of clothes had been brought for her by her parents. But the shadows behind her eyes hadn't fully gone away. "I heard you've been very brave," he said gently. "Talking to the doctors and Maria." Emily looked down at her coloring. "I told them about the house." James felt a small surge of hope. "What did you tell them?" She hesitated before speaking. "It was dark inside. I couldn't go outside. He said if I tried to run, he'd send me away forever." Maria placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "But you're Safe now, honey, nobody's going to hurt you again. James swallowed hard. You did the right thing by telling us, Emily. You helped catch someone who did something very wrong. Emily looked up at him with big, sad eyes. Will I have to talk to more people? Yes, James admitted. But only when you're ready, and you won't be alone. Maria will be there, and so will your mommy and daddy. Emily nodded slowly, then went back to her coloring. James watched her for a moment longer before standing up. As he stepped outside the room, Maria joined him. She's making progress, she said quietly. But she's still scared. This isn't something she'll forget easily. James rubbed the back of his neck. How long do you think it'll take before she can testify? It depends, Maria replied. If we push too fast, she might shut down completely. We need to give her time to heal. James sighed. And in the meantime, that man is sitting in a cell, probably planning his next move. Maria shook her head. He's not going anywhere, and once we start putting together all the evidence, he won't have a chance. Still, James couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. There were too many unanswered questions. Who was this man really? Where had he come from? And most importantly, had he done this before? Back at the station, detectives were digging deeper into the suspect's background. They discovered he had used multiple fake names and had moved, frequently across different states. There were rumors of other missing children in those areas, but nothing concrete had ever been proven. James sat at his desk late that evening, staring at the pile of files in front of him. Photos of the man, documents from his car, and copies of old missing persons reports were spread out like puzzle pieces waiting to fit together. Mike dropped another folder onto the stack. Check this out, he said. This guy has a history of hanging around parks and schools. Witnesses in other towns say they saw him talking to kids, offering candy, pretending to be a teacher or a relative. James flipped through the pages, his stomach twisting. So he's been doing this for years. Mike nodded grimly. Looks like Emily wasn't the first. That thought sent a chill through James. If this man had been operating under the radar for so long, how many other families had suffered because of him? How many children had disappeared without a trace? He stood up suddenly, determination filling his chest. We have to find out where else he's been. If there are other missing kids connected to him, we need to find them before it's too late. Mike agreed. I'll start contacting other departments, see if any of their cases match. James grabbed his jacket and headed toward the exit. He needed fresh air, space to think. As he stepped outside, the cool night breeze hit his face and he looked up at the stars. Emily's face came back to him again. The way she had trusted him, the way she had whispered. Yes. That single word had changed everything. It had led to a rescue, an arrest, and the hope of finding others who might still be trapped. He knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not yet. There were still answers out there, and James wasn't going to stop until he found them. The morning sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the quiet town. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from the small diner across the street. But inside the police station, the mood was anything but peaceful. Officers moved quickly between desks. Phones rang nonstop and the air buzzed with urgency. The case of Emily's kidnapping had become the top priority, and every officer was determined to uncover the full truth. Officer James Carter sat at his desk, flipping through stacks of paper filled with reports, photos, and notes. His eyes were tired, but his mind was sharp. He hadn't slept much since the night he pulled over that car and saw Emily sitting in the back seat, silent and scared. That image stayed with him, pushing him to work harder than ever before. Across from him, his partner, Officer Mike Reynolds, leaned forward with a serious look on his face. We got a hit, Mike said, holding up a folder. Another missing. Child case in a neighboring county. Same pattern. James's head snapped up. Same guy? Mike nodded. Looks like it. A 6-year-old boy disappeared 2 years ago from a park near his home. Parents said a man approached him, offered candy, and told him he was a friend of the family. James felt a cold chill run down his spine. This wasn't just one case, it was a pattern. A predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years, slipping through the cracks of the system. He took the folder and flipped through the pages. Photos of the missing boy, interviews with witnesses, and descriptions of the suspect matched what they already knew about Emily's kidnapper. The same tactics, the same lies. It was clear now, this man had been doing this for a long time. We need to connect with those departments, James said firmly. If we can prove this guy has done this before, we'll have a stronger case against him. Mike agreed. I'll start making calls. We'll need copies of their files and any evidence they collected. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Emily was slowly adjusting to being back with her parents. She still had moments of fear and silence, but she was starting to smile again. Her mother never left her side, holding her hand tightly as if afraid to let go. Her father read her bedtime stories each night, trying to bring back the normalcy she had lost. But even though she was safe, the trauma lingered. During therapy sessions, Emily spoke in soft whispers about the house where she had been kept. Small windows, locked doors, no toys, and only simple meals. She remembered hearing loud voices sometimes, angry arguments between the man and someone else on the phone. When asked who he was talking to, she couldn't remember clearly, only that it scared her. Back at the station, James and Mike worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. They contacted police departments in 3 different states, requesting information on similar cases. Within hours, more reports came in. Missing children, suspicious sightings, and even an old tip line that had gone cold years ago. One report caught James's attention immediately. A 10-year-old girl had vanished 5 years earlier from a school bus stop. Witnesses described a man driving a white van, offering rides to kids after school. Though there was no direct link to Emily's kidnapper at the time, the details were too similar to ignore. "This guy is smart," James muttered, looking at the photo of the man taken from security footage. "He changes his appearance, uses different names, moves around, constantly." Mike frowned. "So how do we stop him for good?" James stood up, determination flashing in his eyes. "We find the people he talked to. Someone had to know where he was staying, who he was working with. If he was part of a larger network, we need to expose it." They began reaching out to victims' families, asking for any new information they might have. One mother, whose daughter had gone missing 4 years ago, recalled something strange. She had received a phone call weeks after her daughter disappeared, an unfamiliar voice claiming her child was safe and happy. The caller had known personal details about the family, things that only someone close would know. James and Mike exchanged glances. This was no coincidence. If this guy was working with others, we could be dealing with a trafficking ring, Mike said quietly. The thought sent chills through James. Human trafficking was a dark, hidden world that often went unnoticed until it was too late. If Emily's kidnapper was involved, then other children might still be out there, trapped, alone, waiting for someone to find them. Determined to follow every lead, James requested access to phone records linked to the suspect's cell phone. The tech team worked overnight, tracing calls and messages. What they found was disturbing: multiple conversations with unknown numbers, references to deliveries and safe houses. Some messages were written in code, but enough was clear to confirm their worst fears. This wasn't just one man acting alone. He had connections. The next day, a meeting was called at the station. Detectives from multiple departments gathered in the conference room, reviewing all the evidence they had collected so far. Maps were pinned to the walls, showing locations where the suspect had been seen. Red pins marked the homes of missing children. Every dot represented a life stolen, a family shattered. Detective Karen Briggs led the discussion, her voice calm but firm. "We believe we're dealing with an organized operation. Our suspect acted as a middleman. He kidnapped the children and handed them off to others." James leaned forward. "Then we need to find those people. If we can trace the money or the communication, we might be able to locate where these kids are being held." A tech officer stepped in with a laptop. "We've been tracking financial activity linked to the suspect's accounts. There are several unexplained transfers, small amounts, spread across different banks. But one account stands out. It receives regular deposits from multiple sources. James studied the screen. That's our connection. They needed a warrant, and fast. The judge approved it within hours, and soon teams were dispatched to investigate the location tied to the suspicious bank account, a remote farmhouse nearly 50 miles outside the city. As the officers arrived, the sky was turning dark. Rain clouds loomed overhead and a cold wind swept through the fields. The farmhouse looked abandoned from the outside, but inside, the team found signs of recent activity: fresh food, warm blankets, and most importantly, children's clothes. James stepped carefully through the rooms, heart pounding. In one corner of the basement, behind a locked door, they heard soft crying. With a swift kick, the door burst open, revealing 3 terrified children huddled together. 2 boys and a girl, all under 10 years old. Their faces lit up with hope when they saw the officers. James dropped to his knees, speaking gently. "You're safe now. We're here to take you home." One by one, the children were escorted out into the rain, wrapped in blankets, and placed into waiting ambulances. Medical workers checked them for injuries while social workers comforted them. It was a moment James would never forget, the joy of rescue, the weight of justice finally catching up to evil. Back at the station, news of the discovery spread like wildfire. Families of missing children were contacted immediately. For some, it was a miracle beyond belief to hold their child again after years of searching. But for James, the fight wasn't over. The man who had taken Emily was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And now that they had found the others, James knew there were still more children out there waiting to be found. He looked out the window at the stormy sky, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This case had changed him. He had started as a cop doing his job, but now he was something more: a protector, a fighter for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And he wouldn't stop until every last missing child was brought home. Rain poured heavily as Officer James Carter stood outside the police station, watching the flashing lights of patrol cars dance across the wet pavement. The discovery of the farmhouse had sent shockwaves through the department and the entire community. 3 more children had been rescued, each one a victim of the same horrifying operation that had nearly destroyed Emily's life. But even with this victory, James felt no relief, only urgency. There were still questions unanswered, people missing, and others out there who needed to be found before it was too late. Inside the station, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Officers moved quickly between desks, phones rang nonstop, and detectives pored over evidence like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be completed. James sat at his desk, flipping through reports, maps, and photos spread out in front of him. His eyes were tired, but his mind was sharp. He couldn't rest. Not. Yet Detective Karen Briggs approached with a file in her hand, her expression unreadable. "We got a lead," she said, placing the folder on the table. A tip came in from someone claiming they saw another child being taken a few weeks ago. Same pattern. Man offering candy, pretending to know the family. James's head snapped. "Up. Where?" "A small town about 2 hours away," Karen replied. "Witnesses described a man matching our suspect's description. He drove off in an old van. No plates were reported, but we have a partial license plate number from a security camera nearby." James grabbed his jacket and stood up. "Let's move." Within minutes, he and Mike Reynolds were in the car, speeding toward the town where the latest abduction might have occurred. The rain pounded against the windshield as they drove through winding roads, surrounded by dark forests and empty fields. James kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts drifted back to Emily. Her silence, her fear, the bruises on her arms. Every child they found made him feel like he was making progress, but every new case reminded him how many more were still out there. They arrived at the town just after sunset. The streets were quiet, most people already inside due to the storm. They met with local officers who had already begun searching for the van. A gas station clerk remembered seeing it parked outside a few days earlier. The man had bought snacks and asked for directions to a remote area near the woods. "That fits the pattern," Mike muttered. "He likes isolated places." James nodded. He knows we'll be looking for him. He's hiding in plain sight. Using the partial plate number, they tracked the van to a rural road lined with abandoned buildings and overgrown lots. It was the kind of place that offered little chance of witnesses and easy escape routes. James tightened his grip on his flashlight as they stepped into the rain, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Then they heard it, a faint cry. It was distant, barely audible over the sound of the storm, but it was enough. James motioned for the others to follow, moving carefully through the trees. The deeper they went, the clearer the sound became. A child whimpering, scared, and alone. They reached a small cabin hidden behind thick bushes. The door was locked, from the outside, covered in rust and dust. James kicked it open, his heart pounding. Inside, a single light bulb flickered above, revealing a young boy tied to a chair, his face pale with fear. "It's okay," James said gently, rushing forward to untie the ropes. "You're safe now." The boy blinked, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I thought nobody would find me," he whispered. "You're not alone anymore," James assured him, lifting the boy into his arms. "You're going home." Back at the station, the mood was cautiously hopeful. The boy, named Lucas, was reunited with his parents within hours. They cried when they saw him, holding him close as if afraid to let go. James watched from a distance, feeling both exhausted and fulfilled. He had seen too much pain in his career, but moments like these reminded him why he kept going. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. With the information from Lucas and the other rescued children, detectives worked around the clock to trace the network of criminals involved. Phone records, bank transactions, and witness statements painted a disturbing picture, one of a hidden trafficking ring operating under the radar for years. James sat with Detective Karen Briggs in a small room filled with maps and notes. She pointed at a name circled in red ink. "This man," she said. "We believe he's the one running the operation. Our suspect was just a middleman." James leaned in, studying the photo. "Who is he?" "A former teacher," Karen replied. "Disappeared 5 years ago after being accused of inappropriate behavior with students. Never faced charges because the case fell apart. Now we think he started this whole thing." James clenched his jaw. "He's been hiding in plain sight." Karen nodded. "And we need to find him before he disappears again." The search intensified. Officers contacted schools, checked rental agreements, and reviewed surveillance footage from multiple towns. Then finally a break came, an old rental contract linked to the man's alias. The address led them to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. They moved fast, arriving before dawn. The building was quiet, the windows dark. James led the team up the stairs, heart pounding with anticipation. When they reached the door, he knocked once, then twice. Silence. "Police," he called. "Open up." No response. With a swift kick, the door flew open. Inside, the apartment was eerily clean. No signs of struggle, no personal items left behind. It was like the man had vanished overnight. But then James noticed something on the kitchen counter. A laptop. He opened it, fingers flying across the keyboard. Files filled the screen. Photos of children, messages discussing transfers, lists of names. He was planning another pickup, James muttered. Mike looked over his shoulder. "Where?" James scanned the documents until he found it, a location just outside the city, an old warehouse used for storage. His pulse quickened. "We have to go now." They loaded up and raced toward the warehouse, sirens wailing through the early morning fog. As they pulled up, the building loomed ahead, silent and ominous. James signaled for backup and they moved in carefully. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Crates lined the walls and shadows stretched across the floor. Then from a side room they heard voices, 2 men arguing in hushed tones. James raised his gun and kicked open the door. 2 figures turned in surprise. One was their main suspect, the man they had been chasing for days. The other was unknown, clearly startled but ready to run. "Freeze!" James shouted. The unknown man bolted, but Mike tackled him before he could reach the exit. The leader of the operation tried to pull something from his coat, but James was faster. He slammed him against the wall, cuffing him tightly. "You're done," James growled. The man smirked. "You don't understand what you've just walked into." James narrowed his eyes. "I understand plenty." As officers took the suspects away, James stepped back, letting out a slow breath. They had caught the ringleader. The network was falling apart, and for the first time in days he allowed himself a moment of peace. But even as the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the city, James knew this wasn't the end. There were still victims to recover, families to reunite, and justice to serve, and he wouldn't stop until every last child was home. The courtroom was quiet, filled with people waiting for justice to be served. Rows of wooden benches held families who had suffered in silence, victims who had finally found their voices, and officers who had worked tirelessly to bring the truth to light. At the center of it all stood Officer James Carter, dressed in his uniform, his face calm, but his heart heavy. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the trial of the man responsible for kidnapping Emily and countless other children. The accused sat at the defense table, flanked by lawyers who tried to paint him as a victim of false accusations. But everyone in that room knew the truth. The evidence was undeniable. Bank records, phone calls, witness testimonies, and most importantly, the brave words of the children who had survived. Emily's parents sat in the front row, holding hands, tightly. They had watched their daughter disappear for months, not knowing if she was alive or dead. Now they were here to see the man who took her from them face the consequences of his actions. James had testified earlier in the week, recounting the night he pulled over the car and saw Emily sitting silently in the back seat. He described the bruises on her arms, the fear in her eyes, and the way she whispered, "Yes," when he asked if she wanted to go home. His voice had remained steady during the testimony, but inside, he had felt the same anger and sorrow he had that night. Now the final day had arrived. The jury had reached a verdict. The judge entered the room and the bailiff called for silence. All eyes turned to the foreperson as she stood up, holding a sealed envelope. She opened it slowly and read the words that would change everything. "On the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp filled the room. Some people exhaled in relief, others wiped away tears. Emily's mother buried her face in her husband's shoulder, overcome with emotion. Across the courtroom, other families embraced, some crying openly. James closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. It was done. The man who had taken so many children, who had hidden behind lies and fake identities, was finally going to prison. The sentence was announced shortly after: life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no early release, no chance for this man to ever hurt another child again. As the courtroom emptied, James stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. The air felt different now, lighter somehow. For years, this predator had moved through the shadows, taking what he wanted without fear of being caught. Now he was gone. But James knew this wasn't just about one man. He had seen firsthand how deep this network ran, how many lives had been touched by its darkness, and though they had shut down a major operation, he also knew there were others out there still doing the same thing, waiting, watching, hiding in plain sight. He walked toward his car, lost in thought. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Detective Karen Briggs. "Good work today, but we're not done yet." James smiled slightly. She was right. This case had changed him. Before, he had been an officer doing his job, responding to calls, writing reports, making arrests. But now he was something more. He had become a protector, not just of the law, but of those who had no voice, no power, no hope, and he wouldn't stop until every last missing child was brought home. Later that evening, James visited Emily's family. Her parents welcomed him warmly, thanking him again for everything he had done. Emily sat on the couch, coloring quietly, but this time, she looked peaceful. When she saw James, she smiled and held up a drawing. "I drew you," she said softly. James knelt down and took the picture. It showed a man in a police uniform standing beside a little girl, both smiling under a bright blue sky. "It's beautiful," he said, handing it back to her. "You're very brave, Emily." She nodded, then hugged him around the neck. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. As James left the house, the sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the street. He looked up at the sky, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. He had done something important today, not just arrested a criminal, but given a child back her life. And tomorrow he would do it again, because that was his job, to protect, to serve, to never give up.